Hi, welcome back to my channel. So, I'm back. It's nothing momentous, but I think I've been away from video making for like more than a week now, and I sort of missed it. Um, yeah, I've been kind of busy doing something else in real life. But in the meantime, I finished 3 books. And with 3 books, we get a recent reads video. Now, before I continue, I just want to say that today is Sunday. And, well, actually, right now it's like Sunday midnight. So it's going to be Monday. But on Monday, I'm not going to have anything up because it's public holiday here in Malaysia, and the reason for that is because on Sunday it's Diwali or Deepavali. So generally in most states in Malaysia, if you have a holiday on a Sunday, then the Monday after that would be a public holiday. So I have a 3-day weekend right now, and I have this mood to talk about books. So here I am. Get ready for some rambling. So I'm gonna start with the first book that I finished after my last recent read. So this is Despite the Falling Snow by Shamim Sarif. And this book was gifted to me by my sister. She bought this book for me, and as some of you may know, I have had interesting experiences with books that my sister gave me. Most of the books that I got from her have been duds. Although there were some nice books that I read before BookTube, and therefore they did not receive that whole BookTube exposure. But you know, recently a lot of duds. But I would say this book avoided that curse. I like this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't like breathtakingly spectacular for me, but at the same time, it was a decent book. It's a nice book with a well constructed plot. So what is this book about? This book centers around a man. There are 2 timelines in this book. One is taking place in 2000s, and the other one is in the 1950s in Soviet Union. So the book starts by introducing to us this character named Alexander Ivanov, and in the current time, in the year 2000, Alexander is a successful businessman who is looking to sell off his business. He's an immigrant from Russia, and he left Russia in the 1950s for America, and he has been living in America, the USA, since then. So he's looking to sell off his company. Now, Alexander had a wife. Now, the wife's name is Katya, and Katya has been dead for a very long time. Around the time when Alexander left for America, and Katya apparently died under mysterious circumstances. So Alexander's niece, Lauren, who is an artist, she was inspired by her aunt Katya, but she doesn't know a lot about her aunt. And whenever she wants to ask more about her aunt from Uncle Alexander, she doesn't get a lot of information, and so she decides to do her own investigation to find out more about what actually happened to Aunt Katya. And her investigation would eventually lead to the second I would say, plot thread in this book, which takes place in 1950s Soviet Russia, and that plot thread would explore Alexander's background, his past in Soviet Union, and how he met Katya, what was the nature of their relationship, what was going on at the time, and basically that side of the story would connect more with the political climate that was going on in Soviet Union at that time. You know, the whole oppression of freedom that was happening among the general population at the time, and how it affected Alexander and Katya's life, and how it would eventually affect their relationship with each other, and the actions that they decide to do afterwards. So yeah, this book has two plot threads. The one that is taking place in the current time in the USA has more of this kind of family vibe, cozy, and it helps that part of that story takes place around Christmas time, and so it has that kind of comfortable atmosphere, and that is contrasted with the other plot thread that takes place in 1950s Soviet Union, where the atmosphere is a little bit darker. There is this kind of oppressive vibe to it as well. It felt a bit noir, you know, with elements of political thriller and also espionage, spy fiction going on in there as well. It's not like full-fledged spy fiction or a political fiction, but it has elements of those, a bit of suspense in there as well. You know, that element of you don't know who you can trust, right? So there's that contrast between the two plot threads, which I find is kind of interesting. I would say one thing that I noticed that binds these two plot threads together is that the atmosphere of coldness. Now, even though the first plot thread in America that takes place in America has a bit of a more positive vibe, the other one has a bit of a more darker vibe, right? Winter and snow is a constant motif in both of these two plot threads, and I feel like thematically, at least in that aspect, they are sort of linked together, which I think is kind of interesting. So there is this kind of cohesiveness in terms of themes. Oh, no, not themes. Cohesiveness in terms of tones of these two plot threads that are presented alternately in alternate chapters in this novel. So that's kind of interesting. I feel like the plot is well paced, well constructed. Although I must add that in terms of emotional punchiness, I didn't think this book really did it for me. I felt like there's a little bit of distance between me as the reader with the characters, especially when we're talking about characters doing things in the second plot thread that is taking place in 50s Soviet Union. I would expect a little bit more sense of stake, especially with the whole political spy thriller thingy going on in that narrative. And I would say, yeah, that's the story does offer you the sense of stake, but I don't feel that it is emotional enough. It feels a little bit wooden, and so I don't feel like I was emotionally invested in the characters' anxiety and ambition and their fears what if things go wrong? You know, I don't feel like it was shown very strongly. So yeah, that was one thing that I noticed that sort of detracted a little bit from my reading experience. But as far as you know, the story, the plot of this book, I think this book could work as something that you might want to read if you're looking for a plot-driven family fiction with a little bit of spy thriller element going on. Yeah, if that's what you're looking for, I think this book could work. But yeah, but if you're looking for something a little bit deeper exploration of life in the Soviet Union at the time, for example, beyond this idea of oppression bad, freedom good, then I don't think you're gonna get much, I think. But yeah, it's a nice book, 3 out of 5 stars. So anyway, moving on to the second book I want to talk about, which is a bit of a departure from what I usually read, because it is a YA fantasy, YA alternate history fantasy. It's called These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. And this book was one of the books that I borrowed from a pop-up library at the mall near my university, and so I don't have the book right now with me. The third book I'm going to talk about in this video would also be a book that I borrowed from that library, and I don't have it with me right now. So yeah, but anyway, back to These Violent Delights. That book is inspired by Romeo and Juliet, and at least elements. It's not a direct transposition of Romeo and Juliet into a alternate history fantasy setting, but rather it takes a bit of element from the Shakespearean work and incorporate it into a setting in 1920s Shanghai. And in this story, just like Romeo and Juliet, we have two warring factions of gangsters that are controlling different areas in 1920s Shanghai. So we have this clan called Scarlet Gang and another one called White Flower. The Scarlet Gang are the Chinese, and the White Flowers are the Russians, and they both control different territories. And the Scarlet Gang, I would say the daughter of the boss is named Juliet, and she is kind of like the heir of the Scarlet Gang, while kind of like the scion of the boss of White Flowers is a young man named Roma. And apparently these two young characters, they've had a history together despite the conflict that happens between these two factions. These young individuals, they've had some history together. However, something bad happened afterwards, which sort of muddled things up for them, which caused them to have a certain animosity towards each other. And so when you begin this book, these knowledge are about the characters are established. You have two warring factions, you have the heirs of the factions having history, but now they hate each other. So yeah, it's all good, you know, until something is threatening Shanghai, something of supernatural nature is starting to threaten the stability of and the lives of people in Shanghai, and it eventually starts to affect whatever these two warring factions are trying to control, and becomes the concern. And these two young characters, these two young people, Roma and Juliet, realize that they have to work together in order to combat this new threat. And obviously, they're going to face a lot of obstacles because of, their associations with their factions and all of those things. So yeah, the story itself is pretty basic. The premise is pretty basic. I find that the story is also quite well constructed. The pacing is consistent. It's not a terribly difficult read, and I was able to sort of breeze through this book quite quickly. It did feel a little bit too long, but I also don't have much complaint about that because, just more substance to the story, I suppose. So yeah, in terms of the plot and the story, I don't have anything much to comment on because I felt that it was okay. It did feel a little bit predictable, especially with the inclusion of elements such as romance between the two main characters. It felt expected, you know what I'm saying? Although this being a genre that is not usually something I usually go for, something that I usually expose myself to, I assume that this element is something that is expected in this genre as well. Maybe. But as someone who doesn't really read a lot of it, I still feel that it felt predictable. But what is predictable can sometimes be a good thing. It can sort of predictability is often also a feature in something that you can consider a comfort read. And I felt that with this book, I didn't feel very challenged, but rather I felt more comforted because it was an easy read. So this book definitely passed as a comfort read for me. It didn't, while it didn't challenge me in terms of new ideas, introducing new ideas or new perspective or whatnot, I felt satisfied reading this book because of the story that it offers me, and I would say the plot itself, the way it's constructed, is pretty strong. Now, I'm gonna say I do have my own expectations. Like with old books, I do have expectations, and with this book, it being a fantasy, I have certain expectations as to fantasy narratives, not just books, but also movies and whatever. With fantasy, I usually hope for this kind of feeling where I feel immersed in it, and once I finish the work, I want to feel that sense of melancholy due to me parting ways with that work of narrative. But in this book, I didn't feel that sense of melancholy, which is kind of strange because usually I would feel that way if, for example, the world building is excellent, or I feel that the character themselves are portrayed as really cool and really awesome. That's a really arbitrary term. Or if I can feel this strong, if I can resonate really well with the characters, then I would definitely feel that sense of melancholy once I leave the work. But with this book, I didn't feel any of those. I didn't feel like I resonate really well with these characters. I don't resonate well with their whole romance arc, or their relationship, the banter going on between these two, the push and pull between them. I felt a little bit detached from that. These characters, they are written as individuals who are capable of incredible feats of skills in terms of like fighting skills or whatever, and that is an element that, for example, in movies I could feel like in awe of, but in this book I just don't feel that sense of awe. In terms of the world building, I would say the world building is built nicely, but it doesn't seem like the kind of world that I would feel really sad about upon leaving. So I didn't feel much from this book. Like, this book did not affect me emotionally. But in any case, I still think that this book is pretty nice. 3 out of 5 stars for me, and I'm looking forward to reading the sequel. I'm interested in reading the sequel because there is a sequel, and I think there are also related works that happen in the same universe as well, with some of the side characters as main characters, I think. Yeah, a lot of things to explore in the future. Anyway, moving on to the third book. Now, the third book, which is also something I borrowed from that library, is a return to my comfort zone. However you want to call it, literary fiction, general fiction, whatever. It is a book by Joyce Carol Oates, and it was my first ever Joyce Carol Oates. It's a novella collection, or short story collection. But it says novella on the cover, so it's novella collection. There are 4 novellas in this collection, and the collection itself is called Evil Eye. So Evil Eye is also the title of the first novella in this book. And yeah, usually short story collections, they are hit or miss for me. Mostly because of how disjointed they can feel sometimes, which is not something that I hold against short story collections, because it's kind of, the nature of short story collections. They are collections of individual works, so you can expect a certain sense of disjointment in it. And I suppose I'm just a little bit sensitive to that. So usually I would like or love a collection if there is a strong theme or strong thread that links all of the words together without making them sounding the same. So yeah, writers, you have difficult jobs to satisfy readers like anyway, and maybe that's why interconnected story formats usually work really well for me, because there's this really obvious link between stories that makes the whole short story collection feel like a cohesive unit. This novel, this novella collection by Joyce Carol Oates, Evil Eye, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So obviously I liked it, and I would say all 4 novellas in this book are linked together quite cohesively. They form a unified unit when placed together. And in fact, the subtitle of this collection is something like 4 novellas of love gone wrong. So there is that kind of link in terms of themes. There is this kind of the theme of perverted version of love, or at least the dark side of love, being explored in all of the 4 stories in this collection. So just very briefly, the first story is about how a 4th wife of a man meets the first meets his first wife, and so this fourth wife is experiencing all this anxiety and fear and worry about why this first wife is still around this man's life, and she's having insecurity of her own, all of those things. So the second story, I'm trying to remember. The second story is about this relationship between a teenage girl and a slightly older, college-aged young man, and their relationship starts out quite innocently enough, but eventually it takes a darker turn. So the third story is about a spoiled frat boy who is trying to kill his parents because his parents decide to cut him off financially. So this frat boy is like angry and stuff, and he's spoiled, so obviously he does things like that. And so the fourth story is about a woman confessing something to her partner about a negative thing that has happened to her in her past that caused her to fear intimacy. So you can see, from these descriptions, there is this close connection between these four stories in terms of relationships, in terms of love, but how love is kind of presented in a rather twisted or dark way. And one thing that I feel is really strong in this collection, aside from how the stories are linked together, is that I find that the writer has this ability to really transport you into the minds of the main protagonists of each story. The writer has this kind of talent to persuade you to be on the same wavelength with each of these protagonists, but you being the outside party, you being the reader, you know that there are certain things that these main characters do not see. You know things that are wrong that these characters do not acknowledge as wrong or do not realize is wrong. And so while the writer is trying to pull you in, you as the reader know that there are times where you have to pull yourself out. And so there's this kind of push and pull, or rather pull in and pull out, kind of interaction going on while you're reading this book, or at least that was how my experience was reading it. I felt like I was actively engaging with the story, and it almost felt interactive somewhat. And it becomes even more obvious with stories like the third story, for example, about this frat boy who wants to murder his parents. And the frat boy is the main character, and so the author is trying to get you into the minds of that frat boy, trying to understand, like sympathize with him, why he wants to kill his parents, but it's not a good thing, right? But the writer keeps on like showing you like this is the thought process of this spoiled frat boy, and just understand him. And I think the story is also written in the first person narrative, or I don't remember, but anyway, it has similar effects where the writer is trying to persuade you to listen to this frat boy, to sympathize with them, and at the same time, I'm as a reader, you don't want to, which is kind of interesting. So yeah, there is that kind of exchange going on with each of the stories. My personal favorite would be the first one. I feel like the first one has a lot of strong nuance because it talks about how a fourth wife feels when a first wife comes over to visit, because the whole thing just feels very unsettling. There are a lot of motifs involving eyes. There are a lot of uncanny valley elements going on in here, a lot of grotesqueness as well. Not going to give out so much details, but there are those kinds of elements, by the way. And a lot of things to explore, aside from that whole anxiety and worry of the fourth wife, being the main character. You feel her anxiety. There are a lot of explorations on themes such as sexism, I would say a bit of classism as well, grief, manipulation, imbalance in power, and how all of these things, they sort of just intersect with each other. And this is the part that I feel makes it really interesting, because it focuses on how all of these seemingly like separate things just kind of play into each other and end up producing this kind of scenario in the story where it feels specific, and with this level of specificity, it comes with its own set of nuance that you can just kind of explore like you're in the mall. Anyway, and it also takes an interesting turn. So the first story is definitely my favorite story. It's also called Evil Eye. So yeah, I guess that's all I want to say about this book, and that means I've talked about all three books that I want to talk about in this video. As of now, I have not finished any more books, so that means until I finish 3 more books or 2 more books, you're not gonna see any recent reads first, or I might come up with some random videos in the meantime if I have some time for that. But in any case, I personally really like this whole randomness of making video like without constraining myself to a fixed schedule. It's just fun. And yeah, in fact, right now I am recording this video. I said midnight just now. It's not too accurate actually. Right now it's already 2:51 a.m. I was just doing something earlier, and yeah, I still have some spare energy left, and it's a 3-day weekend. Anyway, but yeah, I do want to sleep, so I'm gonna go to bed now. I'll see you in other videos, so until then, take care, get some sleep. Get enough sleep. And I'll see you again in a different video. I think I repeated myself. I need to sleep. Okay, bye.